Hello dear polymer clay enthusiast, I'm Michaela from Learn Polymer Clay, and in today's tutorial I want to inspire you to make modern looking jewelry components. And for this we are going to use UV resin and inclusions and interesting mosaic clay pieces on top of the jewelry components. Polymer clay colors that I intend to use for these pieces. So finally I ended up using magenta polymer clay, true yellow polymer clay, and let's say pale blue, light blue polymer clay. So I have properly conditioned these colors of polymer clay, starting with the lightest one. I passed the clay through the pasta machine, through the setting number 3 of my Atlas pasta machine. And then I prepared a rectangle of polymer clay, and I used the rigid blade to cut out thin strips of clay. And I cut initially in a horizontal way and then in a vertical way, but you will notice that these polymer clay tiles, the mosaic pieces, are not all of the same size, so there is a variation in the size, and it wasn't my intention to make them all the same size. And of course, after cutting out these polymer clay tiny tiles, I baked them in the oven, in the preheated oven, for 30 minutes at the recommended temperature. I let the clay cool down, and now I am ready to make my pieces. And then I will just prepare the elements that I intend to include in the UV resin. So I'm going to include some beautiful glass pearl beads and also some beautiful light blue bicone beads, 4mm bicone beads. And I have also prepared some clay tiles, clay tiny mosaic pieces. First, I'm going to make the resin base with inclusions or without inclusions. So I have prepared a silicone jewelry mold, and this is a mold conceived for jewelry pieces because you have like a raised dot, and in fact this will translate into a hollow area where you can insert a jump ring and easily turn these pieces into pendants or earrings, attaching ear wires, of course. So I'm just going to pour the resin out of the bottle and fill out this silicone mold, fill out the components that I want to make using this silicone mold. And for some pieces I'm going to fill the entire area, and for others I'm just going to put a little bit of resin, then put the inclusions that I want to use for that piece, and then fill up the mold with UV resin. So I'm going to use the beautiful glass beads that I received from Panda Hall Selected. You can use these beautiful beads to make dangle earrings, to make bead chains for your pendants. There are plenty of ways to use such beautiful glass beads, and I wanted to use them as inclusions for these jewelry components. You can use a toothpick to pick up these beads or a skewer. And then I'm going to fill up the mold with resin, with UV resin. And in case you notice that you have drippings on top of the mold, it is better to use baby wipes and clean these drippings. If not, you'll have to sand these pieces after curing the resin. And I also wanted to try out the idea of the light blue bicone beads included into a pendant component. And I really like the resulting pieces and the result of playing with inclusions and putting clay, putting stuff on top of the resin, so inside and on top of the resin. Before using the UV lamp and curing the resin, you should double check if the inclusions are in the place where you want them to be. They might move around a little bit. And after adding the inclusions, I'm going to fill up the mold with UV resin. And so for the pieces where I used inclusions, as I said, I poured some resin on the silicone mold, then I added the inclusions, and then I poured more UV resin to fill up the mold. You could use a heat gun and blow a little bit of heat on top of the pieces if you notice bubbles. And then you'll just have to use an UV lamp, and I'm using a powerful UV lamp, so I only had to cure these pieces for 2 consecutive minutes. And so these are the pieces after the first curing. Of course, when working with resin and UV resin, it is recommended to protect your hands with gloves and to clean your tools with rubbing alcohol. So these are the pieces after the first curing. Then I'm going to use again UV resin as a glue. I'm putting some UV resin, a little bit of UV resin on top of a brush, and I'm applying it in the areas where I want to place the clay pieces. And you'll notice that I'm applying also a generous amount of UV resin on top of these clay pieces for a beautiful faux glass effect. And for this piece, I ended up using light blue, true yellow polymer clay and magenta polymer clay. I've made other pieces using other color combinations, so you are free to use the colors, the polymer clay colors of your choice to make such polymer clay mosaic pieces. You'll notice that I'm taking the time to put some resin on top, and I used green polymer clay for this piece, and again magenta. And I decided to put some clay tiles on top of the components which already have inclusions inside the resin to see the effect of the pieces with inclusions and um, decorations, clay decorations on top of the resin. And I personally like this effect of the transparent resin with the clay tiles on top. And I also like the pieces with inclusions and the clay tiles, the colorful clay tiles on top as well. I'm making sure that I have a generous amount of resin on top of these pieces for the faux glass look. Using the brush to pick up the pieces because I have resin on the brush, so it can temporarily glue the piece so that you can pick it up and move it around and place it where you want it to be on the jewelry components. Again, if you notice air bubbles, you can use a heat gun or you can use a toothpick and poke these air bubbles. And again, I'm going to use the UV lamp for 2 consecutive minutes. And these are the finished pieces. And normally, when you are using such silicone molds, if you don't have drippings, the finished pieces look very nice and feel very nice. So normally you don't have to sand these pieces. If you notice that you have to sand the piece, this means you added too much resin, and you can use sanding paper to to sand the resin in those areas. I decided to use 2 small components and turn them into earrings, into mismatching earrings. So in order to do so, I'm just going to use pliers. I'm going to attach a jump ring, and then I'm going to use a second jump ring to attach the beautiful ear wires that I received from Panda Hall Selected. So this is my modern jewelry inspiration for you to try out with resin and with different polymer clay colors. So I hope that you like this idea, and I hope that you will take this inspiration and use it in your work with polymer clay. You'll find. Thank you for watching the tutorial, and stay tuned for more inspiration for work with polymer clay.